The world was white, not the gentle, soft white of a fleeting snowfall, but a hard, ancient, and unforgiving white that stretched from one horizon to the other. It was the white of packed snow, wind-scoured ice, and a sky so pale it seemed to leach the very color from the eye. For the people of the long shadow, this whiteness was both their home and their prison. It was the great white silence, and in the heart of this silence, a deeper, more terrible silence was growing. The silence of hunger. Their home was a shallow overhang of rock at the base of a great cliff that faced away from the prevailing winds, a small pocket of relative shelter in an immense, hostile landscape. There were 34 of them, a clan held together by blood, memory, and the shared, desperate struggle for survival. But the struggle was being lost. The long, brutal winter had outstayed its welcome, clinging to the land with icy claws long after the sun had begun to climb higher in the sky. The herds of reindeer had moved on, following the ghost of a spring that would not come. The hardy musk oxen were nowhere to be found. Even the snow hares, usually a reliable source of meager sustenance, seemed to have vanished into the frozen earth. The clan's food stores, a pit dug deep into the permafrost at the back of their shelter, were empty. The last of the dried meat and rendered fat had been consumed weeks ago. Now they subsisted on hope and the tough, stringy lichen they scraped from the wind-blasted rocks. The children's cries were thin and weak, and the elders sat wrapped in their furs, their faces gaunt, their eyes holding the dull resignation of those who knew the end was near. Cale was the leader. He was not the biggest or the strongest, but his eyes saw the furthest, and his mind held the clan's memories and its wisdom. He was a man carved from the hardship of his world, his face a landscape of wind-burn and worry, his beard threaded with gray. Every waking moment, he felt the weight of 33 hungry souls pressing down on him. He saw it in the hollow eyes of his mate, Lyra, as she gave their own small son a piece of lichen she would have eaten herself. He heard it in the rasping cough of the old tracker, Moral, whose lungs were failing him. The decision had been growing in his mind for days, a seed of desperate resolve. There was one last resort, the ultimate gamble, a hunt so dangerous it was spoken of only in whispers and legends told by the elders. The hunt for the ghost mountain. The mammoth. Mammoths were not like other beasts. They were living remnants of an older, grander world, mountains of flesh and fur that moved with the slow, inexorable power of a glacier. A single mammoth could feed the clan for the entire winter, its hide providing new shelters and clothing, its bones forming the framework for tools and weapons, its tusks objects of awe and power. But to hunt a mammoth was to challenge a god. More hunting parties had been lost to the rage of these beasts than had ever returned successful. Cale gathered the hunters. There were only 4 he could trust for such a task, for men who were still strong enough to endure the trek and brave enough to face the beast. First was Borak, the strongest man in the clan. He was a mountain of a man himself, with arms as thick as tree limbs and a silent, brooding nature. His weapon was a massive spear with a flint point the size of a man's hand. He did not think, he acted. He was their brute force, their battering ram. Next was Finn, the complete opposite of Borak. He was lean and wiry, a man who seemed to be made of sinew and wind. He was the clan's new tracker, having learned the art from old Moral. Finn's eyes missed nothing. He could read a story in a bent twig, a patch of disturbed snow, a faint scent on the wind. His quiet patience was as vital as Borak's strength. Then there was Grohl, a steady, dependable hunter. He was neither the strongest nor the cleverest, but he was fearless and his loyalty to Cale was absolute. He was a follower, but a follower who would hold his ground even when terror was screaming at him to run. The final member of the party was Ren. He was the youngest, little more than a boy, his beard still a soft fuzz on his chin. This would be his first great hunt. He was quick and agile, and his eyes held the sharp, eager fire of youth. Cale saw a younger version of himself in Ren, but he also saw the boy's inexperience. It was a risk taking him, but they needed his young legs and his sharp eyes. And more than that, the clan needed its young men to become hunters, to learn the hard lessons of survival before all the old ones were gone. The rest of the clan watched them go, their faces etched with a mixture of desperate hope and profound fear. Lyra pressed a small, smooth stone into Kale's hand. It was her comfort stone, the one she held during childbirth. "Come back," she whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. Ren's mother hugged him tightly, a silent plea that he stay safe. The hunters shouldered their heavy spears, adjusted the fur packs on their backs containing little more than flint tools and empty skin bags, and turned their faces to the vast, empty plains. They walked for 3 days. The world was a relentless, monochrome canvas of white. The sun was a weak, hazy circle in the sky, providing light but no warmth. The wind was their constant companion, a physical presence that clawed at their fur cloaks, stung their exposed faces, and whispered tales of despair into their ears. At night, they would dig a shallow pit in the snow, huddle together for warmth like hibernating bears, and chew on strips of tough leather to trick their stomachs into feeling full. Kale led them, setting a punishing pace. He knew their strength was a dwindling resource. They could not afford to wander aimlessly. He pushed them towards the low, rolling hills to the north, the traditional grazing grounds of the great beasts. Finn was their guide. He moved at the front, his body low to the ground, his eyes scanning every inch of the snow. For 2 days he found nothing. The land was dead. Borak grumbled, his deep voice a low rumble of discontent. "We are chasing a ghost, Kale. There is nothing here. We should have gone east, towards the frozen river. There might have been seals." "We do not have the strength to hunt seals on the ice," Kale replied, his voice flat and final. "We hunt the mammoth or we die." On the morning of the 3rd day, Finn stopped. He knelt, his gloved hand hovering over the snow. The others gathered around him. There, in a patch of wind-scoured ice, was a depression, a faint, circular mark barely visible to the untrained eye. "What is it?" Ren asked, his voice filled with a nervous energy. Finn did not answer immediately. He traced the edge of the mark with his finger. He scraped away a little of the surface snow and sniffed it. "It is old," he said finally. 2 days, maybe 3. But it is here." "What is here?" Borak demanded. Finn pointed to the north. "The Ghost Mountain." He passed this way. He pointed to a patch of scrubby, frozen willows nearby. A few of the thickest branches were broken, snapped cleanly. He was feeding. This is his territory. A jolt of energy went through the small group. The ghost had become real. The hunt was on. They followed the trail for another day and a half. The signs became fresher. Great, deep footprints the size of shields pressed into the snow. Piles of dung, frozen solid, but still steaming faintly in their core. The sheer scale of the creature they were tracking was becoming terrifyingly apparent. Run felt a knot of fear and excitement tighten in his stomach. He had seen a mammoth once before as a small child, from a great distance. It had looked like a moving hill. Now they were walking into the lair of that hill. They found him at dusk on the 4th day. They crested a low ridge, and Finn held up a hand, signaling them to drop. They crawled the last few feet and peered over the top. The sight stole the breath from their lungs. In the shallow valley below stood the mammoth. He was bigger than any legend had described. A lone bull, old and scarred, his vast, shaggy coat a mixture of brown and gray, dusted with snow. His head was immense, a fortress of bone and muscle, and from it grew 2 magnificent, curving tusks of ivory, each one longer than a man was tall. He moved with a slow, deliberate grace that belied his incredible size, his huge, pillar-like legs planting themselves firmly with each step. He was using his tusks to clear snow from the ground, uncovering patches of frozen grass which he then ripped up with his powerful trunk. He was not a beast. He was a force of nature, a living mountain of power and time. Ren stared, his fear forgotten, replaced by a profound sense of awe. They were just 5 small, fragile men. How could they possibly hope to challenge such a creature? "The Ghost Mountain," Borak whispered, his usual bravado gone. replaced by a quiet reverence. They watched until the light faded, studying the animal, memorizing its movements. As darkness fell, they retreated behind the ridge. The image of the great beast burned into their minds. The wind picked up, howling over the ridge, but they barely felt the cold. A different kind of fire was burning in them now. "He is old," Kale said, his voice low and intense. "He is alone. A young bull would be with the herd. This one has been cast out. He is strong, but he is slow. His hide is thick," Borak countered. "Our spears will be like bee stings to him." "Not if we strike in the right places," Kale said. He began to draw in the snow with the tip of his spear. "We cannot fight him here on the open plain. He would crush us. We must move him. We must make him run." "Run where?" Grohl asked. Kale pointed back the way they had come. "2 sunrises from here, there is a narrow gorge. A place where the land falls away into a deep ravine. The walls are steep. If we can drive him into that gorge, he will be trapped. He will not be able to turn. We can attack him from above." It was a daring plan, one that relied on skill, endurance, and luck. They would have to harry the great beast, to anger it and make it chase them, guiding its rage in the direction they wanted. It was like trying to steer an avalanche. "We will need fire," Finn said quietly, "to frighten him, to push him." They spent the next few hours preparing. They gathered dry moss and resinous wood for torches. They checked their spear points, sharpening the flint with smaller stones until the edges were like razors. There was little talk. Each man was lost in his own thoughts, preparing himself for the ordeal to come. Ren felt a strange calm settle over him. The fear was still there, a cold stone in his belly, but it was overlaid with a sharp, clear sense of purpose. He looked at the faces of his companions in the faint moonlight. Kale's determined focus, Borak's grim resolve, Finn's quiet intensity, Grohl's steady readiness. They were the hunters of the people of the Long Shadow. This was their purpose. At first light they began. They approached the mammoth from downwind, spreading out in a wide semicircle. Kale gave the signal, a sharp bird call. At once, the hunters rose from the snow, yelling and banging their spears against their leather-wrapped arms. 2 of them, Finn and Grohl, had lit their makeshift torches. The sudden appearance of noise and fire startled the great beast. The mammoth raised its massive head, its small eyes blinking. It let out a low rumble, a sound that vibrated through the ground, more felt than heard. It was a sound of annoyance, not fear. It swung its huge head, its trunk tasting the air. "Again!" Kale roared. They shouted and waved their torches, a small, desperate pack of wolves trying to intimidate a bear. The mammoth took a step back, then another. It was working. It did not like the fire, the unpredictable, dancing flames. It began to move away from them in the general direction Kale wanted. For hours they kept up the relentless pressure. It was the most exhausting work any of them had ever known. They would run forward, shout and wave their torches, then retreat as the mammoth made a mock charge, its trunk raised like a striking serpent. The beast was slow, but its stamina was immense. Theirs was not. By midday, the mammoth's annoyance had turned to anger. It knew it was being herded, and it did not like it. It began to make more aggressive charges, forcing the hunters to scatter. During one such charge, Grohl slipped on a patch of ice. The mammoth was thundering towards him. For a heart-stopping moment, it seemed he would be trampled into the snow. "Grohl!" Kale screamed. Borak, without a moment's hesitation, charged towards the mammoth from the side, roaring a challenge and hurling his heavy spear. The spear was not meant to kill, but to distract. The great flint point struck the mammoth's thick shoulder hide and bounced off, doing no harm but causing a flash of pain. It was enough. The mammoth turned its furious attention to Borak, who was already scrambling back. Grohl seized the opportunity to get to his feet and retreat, his face pale with terror. The incident changed the dynamic. The mammoth was no longer just being herded. It was now fighting back. Its rage was a palpable force, a wave of fury that rolled across the snow. It let out a true trumpeting blast of anger, a sound of such power and volume that it seemed to shake the very sky. It began to run, not away from them, but in a blind, furious charge across the plain. And it was running in the right direction. "Now we follow," Kale yelled. "Do not get too close. Let its anger drive it." The chase began in earnest. The hunters were no longer driving the beast, but merely trying to keep up with it, to keep it from turning aside. It was a grueling, desperate race. The mammoth's great strides ate up the ground, its huge feet kicking up clouds of snow. The hunters, their lungs burning from the cold air and the exertion, ran on, their lives now tied to the rage of the creature they had angered. Ren ran with a wild energy he didn't know he possessed. He could feel the thunder of the mammoth's footfalls through the soles of his boots. He saw the raw, untamable power of the natural world unleashed before him, and he, a tiny part of it, was helping to steer it. The fear was gone, burned away by adrenaline and the primal thrill of the hunt. They ran for what felt like an eternity. The sun began to dip towards the horizon, painting the endless white landscape in hues of orange and purple. The gorge Kale had spoken of was close. They could see the land begin to change, the flat plains giving way to broken, rocky ground. The mammoth, seeing the change in terrain, began to slow. It sensed the trap. Its fury was giving way to cunning. "Don't let it turn," Kale screamed, his voice hoarse. "Push it. Push it now." They closed in for the final, desperate effort. They used the last of their energy to rush the mammoth's flanks, waving their dying torches, screaming until their throats were raw. Borak, with a roar of exertion, threw a large rock, striking the beast on its sensitive hindquarters. It was the final insult. With a deafening shriek of rage, the mammoth charged forward, not at the hunters, but blindly ahead, into the mouth of the gorge. The hunters stopped, gasping for breath, their bodies trembling with exhaustion. They had done it. They had driven the ghost mountain into their trap. They could hear it crashing and trumpeting between the narrow rock walls ahead. But as Ren looked at the faces of his companions, he saw no triumph. He saw only a grim, bone-deep weariness, and the cold, hard knowledge that the chase was over. But the real battle, the battle of blood and death, was just about to begin. They had cornered a god, and now they had to find a way to kill it before it, or the great white silence, killed them. The gorge was a deep wound in the earth. Its walls were sheer cliffs of dark, frozen rock, too steep for the mammoth to climb. The beast was trapped. Its trumpeting roars of fury echoed off the stone, a sound of raw, primal power that made the very air vibrate. It paced the narrow floor of the ravine, a caged titan, its initial blind rage slowly cooling into a more dangerous, calculating anger. It would smash its great tusks against the rock walls, sending showers of stone chips clattering to the ground. It was searching for an escape, and its frustration was making it even more unpredictable. The 5 hunters lay on the rim of the gorge, their chests heaving, their bodies screaming with exhaustion. The chase had taken everything from them. The adrenaline that had fueled their run was draining away, leaving behind a deep, aching weariness and the gnawing pangs of their long-held hunger. The setting sun cast long, distorted shadows into the ravine, making the trapped beast below look even more monstrous. "We rest now," Kale said, his voice a ragged whisper. "We watch. He cannot escape. We will need our strength for the morning." No one argued. The thought of confronting the beast in the fading light, in their current state of exhaustion, was unthinkable. Borak, despite his earlier bravery, simply lay on his stomach, his head resting on his arms, his massive shoulders rising and falling with each labored breath. Run felt a tremor in his hands he could not control, the aftershock of the day's immense effort and fear. They established a watch. Finn, whose senses were the sharpest, took the first turn. The others huddled together a short distance from the edge, pulling their furs tight against a wind that now seemed to bite with a new malevolence. The cold was seeping back into their bones, a more insidious enemy than the raging beast below. Sleep was fitful, punctuated by the mammoth's roars and the ever-present gnawing in their bellies. Run was on the last watch in the deep, frigid hours before dawn. The world was utterly silent, save for the whisper of the wind and the occasional restless snort from the mammoth. The beast had finally grown quiet, standing like a great, dark statue in the deepest shadows of the gorge. Run lay on his stomach, his spear beside him, peering over the edge. The moon, a sliver of bone-white ice, cast a faint, ghostly light over the scene. In that moment, Run felt the profound loneliness of their task. They were 5 men, a tiny spark of warmth and life on the edge of a great abyss, preparing to do battle with a creature from the dawn of time, all for the hope of seeing another season. He thought of his mother, of Lyra's worried face, of the hungry children. His resolve hardened. Failure was not an option. When the first pale light of dawn touched the eastern sky, Kale was already awake. He gathered them. Their faces were gray with cold and fatigue. "We do not have much time," Kale stated, his voice low and firm. "Our strength will not last forever. We must finish this now." He pointed down into the gorge. The mammoth was stirring, aware of their presence on the rim. "He knows we are here. He is waiting. He cannot turn to charge us, and he cannot climb the walls. His only way out is forward or back. We will attack him from both sides of the rim. Borak, Groll, you will take that side." He pointed to the opposite rim. "Finn, Ren, you are with me. Our target is the spot behind his great shoulder, where the hide is thinner, and the back of the neck. We will throw from above. The height will give our spears power." It was a sound plan, but they all knew the danger. They were relying on their spears, on small points of sharpened flint, to bring down a creature that weighed more than the entire clan combined. "Wait," Finn said. He had been staring intently at the ground. He pointed to a collection of large, heavy stones near the edge of the cliff. "The spears may not be enough to kill him quickly, but a falling stone has great power." A new element was added to the plan. They would use gravity as a weapon. They spent the next hour painstakingly rolling a dozen heavy boulders, each one requiring the full strength of 2 or 3 men to move, to the very edge of the gorge, positioning them directly above the path the mammoth would have to take. It was back-breaking work, and it left them panting and sweating despite the intense cold. When all was ready, Kale looked across the gorge at Borak and Groll. He raised his hand. Borak nodded in acknowledgement. The moment had come. Now! Kale's roar was the signal. From both sides of the ravine, the hunters rose and hurled their spears. Ren put all of his strength, all of his hope, into the throw. His spear flew in a high arc, a dark streak against the pale sky, and plunged downwards. He saw it strike the mammoth's vast, shaggy back, just behind the shoulder. He saw other spears find their mark. The mammoth let out a bellow of pain and rage. The spears were not deep enough to be fatal, but they were agonizing. It was like being stung by a nest of giant, venomous hornets. The beast thrashed, smashing its body against the rock walls, trying to dislodge the hated shafts. It charged a few steps forward, then back, confused and enraged, unable to reach its tormentors. "The stones!" Kale yelled. "Push!" With a collective, desperate grunt, Kale, Finn, and Ren heaved the nearest boulder over the edge. It fell, tumbling through the air, and crashed onto the mammoth's back with a sickening crunch. The beast screamed, a sound of pure agony, and staggered, its legs buckling for a moment. From the other side, another huge boulder fell, striking its hindquarters. The plan was working. The beast was trapped, wounded, and being crushed from above. But it was far from dead. Its pain fueled a terrifying, final surge of strength. It lowered its massive head and charged, not back and forth, but straight down the gorge, towards its mouth and the open plains beyond. It was making a desperate run for freedom. "It's escaping!" Groll screamed from the other side. "It will not escape!" Borak roared. In a move of incredible, reckless bravery, he ran along the rim, trying to get ahead of the charging beast. He held his great spear not for throwing, but like a lance. His intention was clear. He was going to leap from the cliff onto the mammoth's back, to drive his spear home with all his weight and power. "Borak, no!" Kale screamed, his voice filled with horror. It was a hero's move, a move for the legends, but it was suicide. Borak did not listen. He reached the spot he was aiming for, just as the mammoth's shoulders were passing below. He leaped. For a breathtaking second, he was airborne, a figure of savage grace against the sky. He landed on the mammoth's shaggy back, his feet sinking into the thick fur. He raised his spear to strike the fatal blow into the base of the skull. But the mammoth, in its agony, bucked and twisted with unimaginable violence. Borak, his footing uncertain on the shifting, living mountain, lost his balance. He never got to make his strike. He was thrown from the mammoth's back like a child's toy, flung against the opposite wall of the gorge. He hit the rock with a terrible, final sound and fell to the ravine floor, a broken, twisted heap. A cry of anguish tore from Grohl's throat. Ren stared in horror, his mind unable to process what he had just seen. Borak, the unbreakable, the mountain of a man, was gone. The mammoth, however, was mortally wounded. The fall of the boulders had broken its spine. Its charge faltered. Its great legs, which had carried it across the plains for 100 winters, could no longer support its weight. It stumbled, crashed to its knees, and then, with a long, shuddering sigh that seemed to shake the very foundations of the gorge, it rolled onto its side. The ghost mountain had fallen. Silence descended. A profound, echoing silence, broken only by the whistling of the wind. The hunters stood on the rim, staring down at the two still forms on the floor of the ravine. The vast, dead beast, and the small, broken hunter. The triumph of the kill was completely overshadowed by the bitter cost. The descent into the gorge was slow and somber. They treated Borak's body with a reverence they gave their own kin. They straightened his limbs and closed his eyes. Grohl, his face a mask of grief, took Borak's great spear, its flint point still clean and sharp. It had never found its mark. Then they turned to the mammoth. The sheer scale of their victory was overwhelming. Up close, the beast was even more immense than they could have imagined. Its fur was coarse and thick, its hide like ridged leather armor. Its eye half open was a small, milky orb that seemed to hold a deep, ancient sadness. Ren placed a hand on its flank. The fur was still warm. This creature had been alive just moments ago, a being of immense power and spirit. Ren felt a pang of sorrow for the great life they had taken. Kale saw the look on his face. "We do not celebrate its death," the leader said quietly, placing a hand on Ren's shoulder. "We honor its life. It will give its life to us so that our children may live. This is the law of the hunt, the law of the world." The work that followed was immense and grueling. It was a task of butchering on a scale they had never known. The red and the white, the brilliant, shocking red of the beast's lifeblood staining the pure white of the snow-covered ravine floor. Using their sharp flint knives, they began the painstaking process of skinning the beast. The hide was so thick they had to work in teams, peeling it back in great, heavy sections. Underneath was a thick layer of yellow fat, a priceless treasure that would provide energy and fuel for weeks. And beneath that, the meat, mountains of it, dark, rich, life-sustaining meat. For 2 full days, they worked without stopping, fueled by a grim determination and the first proper food they had eaten in weeks. They gorged themselves on the mammoth's liver, eating it raw while their hands were still bloody. The rich, metallic taste an explosion of life in their starving bodies. They built a fire in the gorge, using the mammoth's own fat for fuel, and roasted strips of meat on hot stones, the savory smell filling the cold air. Their strength slowly returned, but the mood remained somber. Every time they looked at the growing mountain of meat and hides, they saw Borak's face. They knew they could not possibly carry all of it back. They took the best parts, the nutrient-rich organs, great haunches of meat, as much of the fat as they could pack into skin bags, and the heart, which was reserved for the clan's elders as a sign of respect. They also took the head, a monumental task that required all four of them. The great tusks were a symbol of power, a trophy that would tell the story of their hunt for generations. And they carefully wrapped Borok's body in a section of the mammoth's hide, a final, honorable shroud. The journey home was slow and brutal. They built crude sledges from the mammoth's own ribs and hide to haul their precious cargo. They were no longer swift hunters, but beasts of burden, their progress agonizingly slow. The weight was immense, and their path was now marked by a trail of blood, a scent that would surely attract scavengers. On the second night of their return journey, a pack of dire wolves, drawn by the scent, began to shadow them, their howls echoing in the darkness. The hunters had to keep a constant, roaring fire going, using the mammoth fat, and stand watch with their spears, their exhaustion a physical pain. When they finally saw the familiar shape of their cliffside home, they were near collapse. Ran, who was at the front, let out a hoarse cry. The clan, seeing them approach, poured out of the shelter. A hush fell over them as they took in the scene. They saw the four returning figures, gaunt and blood-stained. They saw the great, tusked head on the sledge. They saw the mounds of meat, and they saw the hide-wrapped bundle that was Borok. The cry that went up from the clan was a strange and powerful sound, a mixture of joyous relief and heartbreaking grief. They were saved. The hunger was over, but the price had been a high one. That night, for the first time in months, the people of the Long Shadow feasted. The central fire roared, fed by mammoth fat, casting a warm, vibrant light that filled their home. The smell of roasting meat was the smell of life itself. The children laughed, their faces greasy and full. The elders chewed on tender, cooked meat, a quiet gratitude in their eyes. But it was a feast tinged with sorrow. In a place of honor, Borok's great spear was propped against the rock. Kale, as leader, stood and told the story of the hunt. He spoke of their long journey into the great white silence. He spoke of the cunning of Finn, the steadiness of Grohl, and the courage of Ren, who was a boy no longer, but a hunter. And he spoke of the final, fearless act of Borok, who had leaped onto the back of the ghost mountain and given his life to ensure their victory. As he finished the story, he took the mammoth's great heart, which had been roasting in the embers, and gave the first piece not to the elders, but to Borok's silent, grieving mate. Ren sat by the fire watching the flames dance. He was no longer the eager boy who had set out 5 days ago. He had seen the world at its most vast and unforgiving. He had felt the terror and the thrill of the hunt. He had witnessed incredible bravery and sudden, brutal death. He understood now, in a way he never had before, the thin, fragile line that separated life from death, and the terrible, beautiful price of survival. He looked at the faces around him, illuminated by the fire, and he knew the story of the Ghost Mountain and the sacrifice of Borok would become a new legend for their people. A story told on cold winter nights to remind them of the courage and the cost that was woven into the very fabric of their lives. The red of the blood had been washed away by the snow, but its memory would warm them for generations to come.